William Walker Atkinson's The Arcane Formulas, Lesson 9. Cyclicity and Balance. The swing of the rhythmic pendulum is always at right angles to its central line of suspension. The swing of the rhythmic pendulum is always at right angles to its central line of suspension, always to and fro, backward and forward, from a fixed center of gravity which is directly under its point of suspension. A similar law is evident in the movements of a body revolving in a circle, in which is manifest the power of the central point which holds the body from flying off into space, and also the power which causes the body to continue in a cyclic revolution instead of falling toward the center. In fact, the cyclic motion is merely another form of rhythm and is dependent upon the latter, just as rhythm itself is dependent on the existence of the law of opposites, or polarity. Polarity, or the opposites, is the fundamental cause of both rhythm and cyclicity. All active movement expresses itself in rhythmic motion between its two poles or opposites. But this rhythmic motion is not necessarily always in a straight line, as in the case of the pendulum. In fact, the motion of large bodies, and also of races, history, events, etc., is generally in a circle. This results from the attraction and repulsion of objects and forces outside of the swinging thing, which tends to draw it out of its backward and forward swing, and which gradually converts the straight line of the swing into a circle. Consequently, on all sides and in all things, we find the law of cyclicity in full operation. As the aphorism states, cyclicity is akin to rhythm and arises by reason of it. All events tend to move in a cyclic trend, in constant circular movement of continuous recurrence. The only escape from cyclicity is found in the process of transmutation into spirality. This is accomplished by advancing the central point of motion. The conversion of the circle into the spiral is one of the highest forms of mental alchemy. It is evident to all who will examine the subject that the mental life of the average person is merely the constant traveling around and around in a recurring circle. The circle gradually widening from childhood to the prime of life, and then narrowing from that time to the old age and death. The average person is held firmly bound by this law of cyclicity, and while he finds the circle widening or narrowing, as the case may be, he never makes any real progress. There's always a constant swing around the same old central point, a process similar to the travel of the squirrel in the treadmill of his cage, a constant traveling which results in his getting nowhere. It is only when the individual is able to convert the circle into the spiral that he is able to advance. All real advance is accomplished in this way. Many acquire spirality by accident, as it were. They find that by the assertion of the ego, by the use of the inner will, they are able to advance the central point of motion. Advanced occultists are able to consciously advance their central point of life motion, and thus do so intelligently, that which the average person does to a lesser degree under the unconscious influence of circumstances. It is most difficult to render simple and plain the arcane formula regarding this form of mental transmutation, for it is so bound up with the conscious use of the will that it cannot be understood except by those who have felt the realization of the will, consciousness. It may be described in this way, however. The average person merely desires to advance. This desire exerts more or less influence on the will. When, however, a person has learned to will, he is able to accomplish far more than he could by the mere power of plain desire. By his conscious will, he is able to project his ego a step or more in advance in the cosmic scale, and thus establish a new center of cyclic motion. By the increasing power which comes to him gradually by this conscious use of the will, the individual establishes a habit of spiralic progression which replaces the old simple cyclic movement. The neophyte, by cultivating the habit of constantly willing an advance at each circle, will find that though his life still maintains its circular movement, yet at each return to a given point will he advance a little higher in scale and plane. Just as a traveler ascending a mountain must needs go round and round it, each time a little nearer the peak, so will the traveler along the path of attainment find that at each circling the old paths will be below him. The study of the succeeding chapters of this book will give the neophyte additional instruction and suggestions in the direction of the use of the visualizing power of the mind to bring about the desired conditions. Visualization may be employed in this matter of converting the circle into the spiral, as well as in the minor matters of life. The distinguishing mark of the advanced occultist or individual who has found the real self is poise or balance. This is always a mark of power, just as its opposite is always a mark of weakness. As the aphorism says, poise is power. Poise results from balance. Balance is secured by adjusting and maintaining the center between the pairs of opposites. By balanced poise, the master neutralizes polarity and rhythm by resolving them into unity. In the heart of the storm is peace. In the center of life there is poise and power. Seek it ever, for in it thou shalt find thyself. The old occult masters were wont to illustrate the balanced life of the advanced ego by the figure of the acrobat walking the tightrope, a feat which has descended to us from antiquity. They would picture the initiate traversing the razor-edge wire of life, balancing himself by the balancing pole of the opposites. Now shifting the weight on one side and now on the other, he is able to walk the path in safety. Having the confidence of the awakened ego, he trusts to his own power and the use of the balancing pole. The untrained person attempting the feat will be home over by the pull of one emotion or feeling or another, and would be dashed to ruin. But the balanced ego walks in confidence and safety because of his mastery of the art of balance. Pitting one emotion against another, he neutralizes the one which threatens to pull him down. By mental alchemy or transmutation, he is able to transmit a dangerous pull into a part of his balancing process. His axiom is, action and reaction are equal. And this principle he applies in all the emergencies and crises of life. He always manages to have a push or a pull to counteract a push or a pull in a different direction, and thus balance and poise is maintained. Balance and poise may be attained by entering into a realization of the real nature of the ego, that the ego is based and focalized in will, and that the ego can and should always act from the plane and position of will, rather than from the plane and position of emotion and feeling. In fact, the entire instruction of this book, up to this point, has been in the direction of leading the individual to a consciousness of his real nature, which, if once acquired, must inevitably result in perfect balance and poise. The facts stated, the instruction, the exercises, all will aid in the acquirement of balance and poise. And toward this goal, all of our efforts have been directed. Balance results from mastery. Mastery results from knowledge and practice. You have been told the truth. Make it your own. Realize what you are. Practice the methods of the formulas. Then and then only will you enter into that consciousness of peace, poise, and power which comes to him who hath acquired balance. As we have said in the Arcane teaching, in the center of life shalt thou find poise and power. In the heart of the storm shalt thou find peace. In the center of the cosmos shalt thou find thyself. He who finds the center of himself finds the center of the cosmos, for at the last they are one. Now stay tuned for lesson 10 in the next video. It's a whop dinger. It's called Mentalism in a Nutshell.